Well, good afternoon. Would you want to sit down now? It's the throne. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Middle East Institute. I'm Wendy Chamberlain. I'm the president, and it is my very great pleasure and privilege to welcome back to the Middle East Institute Dr. Mona Makram-Ebeid, professor of political science at the American University of Cairo, and importantly, she's a member of the Advisory Council to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, the SCAF. Dr. Makram-Ebeid is a true political insider. She's been working inside government and outside government in Egypt, and it is a great honor to have her with us today to help explain what is going on in Egypt today. MEI hosted her last year, April 2011. Much has changed, much has happened in Egypt since then, but her talk then was called The Fight for Egypt's Soul. And I think all of us can agree that that would be a very apt title for today's talk as well, a year later. Dr. Makram-Ebeid's talk comes at a particularly critical moment. You all know why. Egypt's democratic transition is reaching a critical point. In just a few weeks, on May 23rd, Egyptians will go to the poll for the first round of presidential elections since Hosni Mubarak departed. The run-up to this historical election has not been without controversy. Many Egyptians, including the Islamists, worry that the military council, that its intention is to install its own president and keep the power. Those on the left worry that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists will, after the election, get control of both the presidency and the parliament, and that this would crowd out liberal and more moderate voices in Egypt. Dr. Makram-Ebeid has played a very personal and close, pivotal role in this troubled transition. As I mentioned earlier, she's a member of the Advisory Council to the SCAF, and she recently resigned from Egypt's Constituent Assembly in protest of the Islamist majority. Her departure means that there are now only 5 women and 5 Christians remaining in the assembly.
No,
not remaining.
Not remaining? They all went out.
They all went out. Okay. We're going to get a great talk today, set us all straight. But we are extremely fortunate to have her with us in her short visit to Washington at this critical period. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Mona Makram-Ebeid.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be back here at the Middle East Institute, for which I have a particular weakness, I must say, because it's not the first time that I come. And ironically, I was there at exactly the same time last year. With a different take, of course. It was full of euphoria, full of hopes. Different thing today. Now, let me start first by summarizing and then going into more details about what we're going through. This past week has been fraught with danger. I'm just arriving from Cairo just a few days ago. Anxiety and fear, as you must all have felt. At the bottom of all that, insecurity and violence, at times, is the constitutional declaration, whereby the Egyptian political process has no consistent political logic. And this is completely contrary to what happened in Tunisia, where they started with a constitution. We did not. On one critical and controversial issue, which is the sequence of constitutional writing and presidential elections, the document was simply silent. With regard to sequence, most observers suspected that the SCAF did have a specific order in mind. They thought that if presidential elections could be postponed, the generals could oversee the writing of the constitution. However, it is more likely that the SCAF was following no clear strategy, and that's what I think, at no strategy at all and simply wrote a document that allowed for various possibilities, as we can see that now unfolding. The Parliament has taken up its task of naming the drafting body, deciding that half of the members will come from its own ranks and the other half from various groups in Egyptian society. What appeared is that not only was half of the drafters from Parliament, with a visible domination of the Islamist parties, but also 25% of the rest outside Parliament belonged to that tendency, a fact which caused most of the secular, liberal, leftist and other political and religious forces such as the Azhar, the Coptic Church and the Constitutional Court representatives to withdraw, including myself. Today there is a clear will, after the court judgment stipulated that Parliament is not to draft the Constitution, but the 100 members should be elected from outside Parliament. There is a will, but nothing has been done to reach a compromise in view of the current dangerous and volatile situation. What about the secular parties and independent politicians with either a liberal or leftist orientation? Defeated politically, as we saw in the parliamentary elections, given their fragmentation and lack of on-the-ground organization, they have turned to the courts to reverse the outcome of the Constituent Assembly and have won the case. But the transition process is left in total shambles until now. The SCAF has now used this opportunity to step in and impose a new process. In the past week, the possibility of a showdown between the Brotherhood and a diverse coalition of generals, liberals, senior bureaucrats and scattered judges had emerged. There was a fear that such a showdown could have produced a severe crisis with some kind of a coup or a set of street confrontations, which indeed took place last week, mainly supported by the Salafis and supporters of their presidential candidate, Hazem Abu Ismail. Thank God the Egyptians did not lose their sense of humor. So, concerning Hafiz Abu Ismail, the saying goes that the country was looking for a president that would solve the country's problems. Instead, they got a president who wants the country to solve his mother's problems. So, all the decisions now that are taken are inevitably highly political because the country is in a constitutional limbo. The 1971 Constitution was abrogated by the SCAF, and you had instead a constitutional declaration of dubious legal standing. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood, seeing the threat to its domination of all state institutions, has run a presidential candidate, thus flagrantly contradicting earlier statements that it would refrain from doing so. Another contradiction on the part of the Muslim Brothers was that the election of the Constituent Assembly was accomplished by having Brotherhood deputies form a bloc with the Salafis, setting something the Brotherhood has consistently said it did not wish to do. For the time being, the court has acted ambitiously and politically by disbanding the Constituent Assembly. So what we have today is that both sides, the SCAF and the Brotherhood, are ready for confrontation. But if they both back off, we might move towards the Turkish model of 20 years ago, not the one of today, with a military that keeps its fingers in the political machinery in disruptive and undemocratic ways, and an Islamist party that uses its popularity to move the society slowly in its direction, unobstructed, unfortunately, by weak opposition and aided by its majority status and ability to slowly penetrate the pockets of the state and the society. This is one of the scenarios. The result might not be ideal, but it may be more preferable than a battle that pits the state against a deeply entrenched social movement in a struggle to the death. Under this scenario, the biggest losers will be the secular parties, as you can imagine. So to go into a bit more details, Cairo is tense. It is polarized. Egypt's military is groping for solutions to the many political and economic problems that have beset the country since the fall of the old government. Various political parties and groups are united in their opposition to the military, despite being divided among themselves. The Muslim Brotherhood is intent on monopolizing everything. This is also very depressing when you think of the extraordinary revolution that had the world transfixed by the courage and determination of young Egyptian men and women. What we are mainly confronted with today is the political monopoly which the Islamists are pursuing, thus undermining prospects for democracy in Egypt and threatening to intensify political instability. What is at stake is the identity of the Egyptian state. Is it going to be a civil state that dates back to Muhammad Ali, the founder of modern Egypt, or a theocratic state as proposed by overreaching Islamists? After ensuring its dominance over the legislature, the Brotherhood further alienated secularist party by monopolizing, as I said, the legislatively appointed 100-member Constituent Assembly, which will write Egypt's next constitution, catalyzing a significant political crisis. And this is what happened a week ago, when the Islamists took 72 of the seats. So liberals withdrew and pitted their support behind the lawsuit that subsequently froze all activities of the Assembly. So today, the activities of the Constituent Assembly are frozen. But freezing the Constituent Assembly activities means it is unlikely that there should be a constitution by the time presidential elections are over. As for the presidential elections, the SCAF made it for the first time quite clear last week that it insists on having the constitution drafted first, with a referendum to follow, causing another uproar from the political parties and some of the presidential candidates. However, Egypt cannot wait for long before holding presidential elections, as the country is getting restive under military rule, as shown by the latest demonstrations this last Friday. Egyptians' desire for the SCAF to surrender power as quickly as possible is justified. After a year at the helm, the military failed to steer a quick and viable transition process or to tackle major policy issues. But the present path to quick presidential elections leaves no time for the adoption of a new constitution, let alone one adequately discussed and supported by a broad consensus. Today, some Egyptians claim the country has good constitutions already. 1923, we had an excellent constitution, 1954, and even 1971, which could be dusted off quickly and take the articles that are most adaptable to the current situation. But none of these previous documents call for the parliamentary or mixed systems, like France, for example, both favored by the Freedom and Justice Party. It is the 5th article of the Constitution which will cause most of the controversial debates if we decide to accept or to recreate the 1971 Constitution. The 5th article deals with 1, the powers of the president, 2, the structure of the political system, 3, the role of the military establishment. The advisory council to which I belong is insisting that the writing of a successful constitution is not a technical exercise, nor should it be dominated by one particular trend, even if it has a parliamentary majority. A successful constitution should be the result of a consensus-building process. It is also insisting that the constitution should be drafted before the election of the new president, an issue which is violently opposed by, among others, some of the presidential candidates. A few non-Islamists have been attempting to entrench a permanent role for the military due to their growing fear of the Islamists. For the Brotherhood, the Constitution represents the legal blueprint for the post-Mubarak Egypt and the key to transforming its political project into an institutional reality. There is no need for them to rebuild the Egyptian state from the ground up in order to pursue its main goal, which is its Islamizing agenda. In a sense, the biggest questions facing Egypt today are whether the newly dominant Brotherhood and the SCAF turn to conflict or compromise, and how far and how fast the Brotherhood might push to make Egypt more Islamist. What is interesting also is to look at the new role of Al-Azhar, which tries to position itself as an arbiter between all the major political movements. The great Imam, Dr. Ahmed al-Tayyib, an enlightened and incisive scholar, a graduate from the Sorbonne University, has issued 2 declarations with a number of intellectuals of all hues and some Azhar ulamas, to which I had the honor to participate as a member of the Beit al-Aila, which is something similar in a sense to the Bill of Rights, and constitutes a guarantee of all rights if adopted as a core of the new constitution. This is what I keep on calling for in any of my interventions or TV interviews, that it should serve as a platform in the writing of the new constitution. In affirming basic freedoms of belief, equal opportunity, and preventing sectarian strife, the document is clearly aimed at promoting a moderate interpretation of Islam over more conservative elements such as the Salafis, who advocate a strict literalist reading of the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence. It also reflects a consensus, the only one in fact, in Egypt, among a broad ideological spectrum of liberal, secular, and Islamist political forces, deals extensively with basic rights and liberties, and if there is anything the United States can do to help Egypt in this crucial period, it is to encourage the adoption of Al-Azhar statements and encourage all political actors to realistically address the challenges that are facing it. For many years, Al-Azhar has been overshadowed by the regime. Today, it does not want to be marginalized by the Brotherhood and the Salafists, the 2 main beneficiaries of the revolution. Since Nasser's decision of 1961, the President of the Republic has appointed each great Imam of Al-Azhar. Nevertheless, today several forces are pushing for a new mode of designation, and that is to elect the Grand Imam. The election of the Sheikh Al-Azhar would reinforce the legitimacy of the position, and he would thus gain in credibility in the eyes of the population. Such a measure would also safeguard Al-Azhar against any political pressure from the Muslim Brotherhood. However, although there is surface consensus that Al-Azhar must become more independent, there are sharply contrasting visions on the role it should play in Egyptian society and politics. Given Al-Azhar's centrality, the outcome of the struggle among those visions will deeply shape the role of religion in Egyptian public life. The current Sheikh Al-Azhar, Dr. Al-Tayyib, has managed to position himself as an autonomous and credible voice. That is why there is today, on the liberal side, a clear intent in buttressing Al-Azhar as a means of strengthening a religious counterweight to Islamist movement. We are also pressing the Sheikh Al-Azhar to have a statement similar to the ones that have been issued on women's rights. The question is, will the Islamists and the powerful Al-Azhar establishment accept a legal framework that give the military any formalized role in the political process? No doubt that competing visions for a reconfigured balance of power in the new political system will be confronting each other. And now to sectarian conflicts. In Egypt, the occurrence of sectarian conflicts tends to increase when the political situation deteriorates. As a matter of fact, the sectarian clashes have intensified over the past year. More generally, the Christian situation has worsened over the past year. The increased segmentation of the Egyptian society and the newly acquired influence of the Salafi Muslims have led to the radicalization of segments of the Coptic population, which will most probably react to an Islamist presidential victory. Many Christians express a growing fear, and not just from the content of a new constitution. That is why a declaration of inalienable rights is perhaps the most positive step for assisting the full integration of the Coptic community into Egypt's political and social future. But for change to happen, it must begin at the grassroots level. It must begin with the Coptic community itself. Copts cannot afford anymore to insulate themselves into a separate Egypt, especially with a turn towards conservatism in parliament, which will be a major impediment to creating a civilly egalitarian and democratic society. Rather, they must first push their own leaders to support representatives of the community and a unified civil identity, instead of the old confessionalism that has been the basis for so many of the sectarian issues in the past. Pope Shenouda's death, though long anticipated, could scarcely have come at a worse moment. As Egypt's largely Islamist Constituent Assembly was elected to draft the state's post-Mubarak charter, the Coptic community, comprising 10% of Egypt's population, was leaderless. And among the 100 drafteers of the constitution, only 6 Copts were included. Notwithstanding the Pope's centralizing measure, as he came to be seen as the only legitimate voice of the community, the Coptic community today is more fragmented than it has been since the early 60s. To secure reforms that they are demanding through this turbulent period of political transition, Coptic secularists and traditionalists, meaning the priests, will need to work together, because although church leaders have more clout within the Coptic community, Coptic leftists and liberals are often better at connecting with Egyptian society writ large, particularly since many of them walked out of the Constituent Assembly on the basis that the Assembly was insufficiently representative. That is why it is important to have an effective Coptic community voice at the table in order to make sure that Egypt's Christians will have legal protection. What is interesting to watch today is the reaction of young Coptic activists who have been working to fundamentally change the way the community engages politically. They are now forming a new alliance of a majority of Coptic movements uniting under one umbrella. These youngsters, and not so young, are the product of what is called the Asqufiyat al-Shabab, which was within the precincts of the church, but disseminated all over Egypt. Interestingly enough, the Coptic youth today have no qualms in coalescing with the Brotherhood's young youth movement. The church's hierarchy's monopoly on Coptic political activity eroded during the last year of the Mubarak regime, largely as a result of an upsurge in anti-Coptic violence and the feeling of regime complacency and unwillingness to curb sectarian violence and unfair laws governing church construction. Many Copts became convinced, particularly after the 2011 bombing at the Alexandria Church of the Two Saints, that the security apparatus was also complicit in the violence, as the WikiLeaks document has shown. Church support for the former president continued throughout the 18 days of the uprising, opposing the protesters and even privately ordering them to stay home. However, I was there for 10 or 12 days, and I came out and encouraged them to stay and to continue in this magnificent show of solidarity that you must have seen on TV that has not happened since 1919. The crisis of political authority ushered in by the fall of Mubarak opened new space for Coptic activists to operate outside traditional hierarchies. What the Salafis would like is to empty Egypt of its Christians. However, this is not an easy task to do. They've been here, Christians, for as long as there has been Christianity in the world. Close to a millennium and a half of Muslim rule and coexistence did not eradicate the nation's Christian community. Rather, it maintained it sufficiently strong and sufficiently vigorous to play a crucial role in shaping the national, political, and cultural identity of modern Egypt. Yet now, 2 centuries after the birth of the modern Egyptian state, and as we embark on the second decade of the 21st century, the previously unheard of seems no longer beyond imagination. What is called for by the radical brand of Islamists is a Christian-free Egypt, one where the cross will have slipped out of the crescent's embrace and off the flag symbolizing our modern national identity, proclaimed loud and clear by Saad Zaghloul, the father of independence, in 1919, which says, "Religion is to God and the homeland to all." We had a government who thought that by outbidding the Islamists, by Islamizing the society, it could also outflank them. They were proven quite wrong. We had state bodies who believed that by bolstering the Salafi trend, they were undermining the Muslim Brotherhood, and who liked to occasionally play up to bigoted anti-Coptic sentiment, presumably as an excellent distraction from other more serious issues such as the succession. And now with relations with the United States. The latest crisis in US-Egypt relations was precipitated by Egyptian outrage over the fact that American democracy promotion NGOs brazenly operated in Egypt, although they were not officially registered. I want to tell you that these NGOs have been there for the past 6 or 7 years. So the uproar should not have been against the present government, but against the past government, who allowed them to stay without being registered, holding a sword of Damocles on their head. On the other hand, it was also a way for the SCAF to show its disapproval of the new contacts between the American administration and the Islamists. These contacts had been established without the army's mediation, as if the transition period under the authority of the army belonged to the past. We believe that a deterioration of the relations between Egypt and the United States will serve nobody's interests. The new parliament is controlled by the Muslim Brothers, with whom Washington is just beginning to become acquainted, and by Salafis, who are outright hostile to the United States. Egypt is important to the United States. It is the largest country in the Middle East and has signed a peace treaty with Israel, which of course is something the United States wants to preserve. On the other hand, the military will not be running the country much longer, but it will remain a powerful player. And Egypt still needs the United States. Both sides must keep in mind that the future of bilateral relations is much more important than the future of American NGOs in Egypt. Washington policymakers should be aware that revoking financial aid would risk severing the tie that for 3 decades has bound the United States, Egypt, and Israel in an uneasy alliance, but it is the cornerstone of the American-backed regional order. As a prominent writer has suggested, the last thing that Egyptians, who had entirely on their own dislodged their dictator, renewing a sense of national pride and spirit, the last thing they want to see is a foreign power expertise and advice about how to manage their transition. Mubarak's policies as a strategic ally of both the United States and Israel was running directly against the grain of Egyptian public opinion, who felt humiliated by this policy of dependency. Therefore, no Egyptian leader will make Mubarak's mistakes again. What do Egyptians expect from the Obama administration? One, that the US should come to terms with the end of the strategic relationship. What we need today is a relationship based on mutual respect and partnership. Two, is to take a hands-off approach as Egyptians build a new political system on their own terms. This is what I emphasized to Ambassador Ann Patterson when she asked me what the US could do. Three, praise and encourage the Al-Azhar statements, which underline inalienable rights which reflect the values that America has always stood for: tolerance, pluralism, instead of pandering only to the Islamists. The United States can and should do much more to incentivize and support economic reforms, such as fostering trade and private investment, which in turn will support the political transition to democracy. Specific forms of aid that can facilitate grassroots development initiatives could have a lasting impact. And lastly, a free trade agreement would be the best way to signal a deep and durable commitment by the United States to the success of the Egyptian transition. And now a few words about the presidential candidates, which I'm sure you want to hear. So, unlike what you hear, we have excellent presidential candidates. Not all of them stand a chance, but some of them are very good. Some represent the revolution, having participated in the revolution and having been quite visible then. Others represent the leftist wing of the political spectrum, and of course are endorsed by the leftist parties. Others are the Islamists. Today the Islamists are 2 or 3 of them, and with some of them being more popular, like Dr. Abdelmenem Abul Futuh. But as you heard lately, Dr. Abdul Futuh has had the endorsement of the Islamist organization and by the Wasat, which is a derivative of the Muslim Brothers, and by the Salafis. So, not by the Ikhwan yet. They are divided over him because he had left the Brotherhood and they don't know if they should support him or not. And then they have their own candidate, Dr. Morsi. And then you have El-Awa, and you have Dr. Abdelmenem Abul Futuh, who is a great person, a great man, but having the support of the Salafis and the Jama'ah Islamiyya means that he will be forced, once in power, to radicalize his position and will therefore enter a phase of escalation of Islamism with the Salafis. This could foster support for a reversion to military rule. Among the candidates, you have the one who is closest to a secular state is the former Foreign Minister Amr Moussa. He has the solidity, the maturity, and the experience. My bet is that common sense will prevail at the end, and that the Egyptians know in their heart who is in a position to make them traverse the extra mile needed to reach more secure and safe shores. His program includes the strengthening of the institutions of civil society, as he understands that a transition towards democracy and a free market economy is unlikely to succeed without broad public support that can only occur in the context of a vibrant civil society and open public debate. Now, 5 sectors of the society are certain to endorse him as a president. One is the tourism industry. They account for about 10 million voters today. They've been hardly hit not only by the revolution and its outcomes, but also by the statements of the Islamists prohibiting so many things that are their bread and butter after all. The second sector, which is bound eventually to support him, is the Coptic community today, which comprises about 5 million voters, if they form a bloc. For the time being, they are divided. The third sector is women, who do not want to be told what to wear or how to pray or if they should stay at home or not. The fourth one is the liberal, leftist, and secular forces and parties, who, once again, if they form a bloc, they would constitute maybe about 10 million voters. Now, the fifth one are the Sufis, who since the revolution have become firm allies of both the transitional authorities and of liberals. They identify with Al-Azhar and are driven by a consuming fear of Salafis and Islamists in general. This comprises the Bedouin Arabs, whom you hear about in the Sinai and so on, who are great supporters of Mr. Moussa, having thrown last week a big conference to support him. To conclude, Egypt continues to live in the shadow of a counter-revolution. Some of the most crucial of the revolution's demands remain unfulfilled, while the makeshift character of concession creates an anomalous situation that could well threaten not just the achievements of the revolution, but also the very stability and political future of the nation. A great deal still needs to be done before the Egyptian revolution is realized, as it insists that it should be and as it has earned the right to be. Only a fully democratic Egypt is acceptable. Anything short of that goal will simply not do. With all their blunders, the military have taken great strides towards the Egyptian people, first by taking sides with the people, and then in their decision to overthrow Mubarak. Mubarak did not resign, he was overthrown. The millions who descended on Tahrir Square and poured onto streets across the country triggered a decisive shift within the ruling power structure, within which the military had become a predominant actor. During the past year, notwithstanding all its mistakes, the military has taken great strides again towards the people by securing the parliamentary elections. It is time for them today to traverse that crucial extra mile, for only then will the Egyptian revolution have met with success, and only then can we begin to undertake the most challenging and most satisfying of jobs, and that is the job of rebuilding our nation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Doctor. If you have a question, well, please wait for the microphone, and if you could state your name and affiliation. The reason why it's important that you speak into the microphone is because we are filming this and taping this so that you'll be able to both view and listen to her very interesting talk on our website. Questions?
Hi. Hi, my name is Greg Hamilton. I'm here as a private citizen. I have a question. I hear a lot of officials, such as yourself, that speak about what the United States needs to do to foster friendship with Egypt. What I'd like to know, outside of maintaining the current strategic relationship that we have, what is Egypt willing to do to foster further friendship with the United States?
What is Egypt ready to do? Egypt is ready to appreciate the alliance with the United States. As I said, Egypt needs the United States, but on a different standing. No more the strategic alliance that existed before the 25th of January, but a relationship that could be built on mutual respect, on partnership, and respecting the dignity of the Egyptian people who have felt very humiliated by the dependency that existed during the past government. So today there is, I wouldn't say today exactly, there is goodwill towards the United States, but I would like to refer to something very important. During the 18 days of the revolution, not one word was said against the United States or Israel. And this should be a clear indication that the revolution was not against either the United States or Israel, but for domestic problems that were very pressing. National dignity, social justice, and freedom. So these were the main issues. So what you can do is to foster these main issues, who are very common to the American values. This is what we need today to underline are the slogans of the revolution and what this revolution, who has had so many martyrs die for, stand for. And I mentioned a few things, like free trade agreement. This will be one of the best things that could be done now.
Doctor, hi. I'm Anna Skabinski. I'm from Epoch Times. I just returned from Cairo, where I had a chance to interview the spokesperson of the Muslim Brotherhood in Manuel Roda, where their Freedom and Justice Party's office is. It now appears that it is the Muslim Brotherhood that is insisting that they are upholding the democratic process. And
they insist with you.
And
not with us.
Indeed. Well, I wanted to ask you if are they in any way playing against the rules of democracy, and your comments on that? And I have another question, which is apparently it seems that many of the voters are illiterate. They could not read the ballot. Do you have any comments on that as well?
I'll confirm what you just said. 40% or 30%, let's say, not to be too cruel, are illiterate. And this is the sector on which the Islamist tendency plays. And by saying that voting for them is voting for heaven or voting for Islam. And that was what happened in the referendum on the 19th of March last year. And that's why they got 14 million voters for them and only 4 million for the secularists. So the play on religion is today very forceful because Egypt is a very religious country. Whether it's Christians or Muslims, religion is very important, but unfortunately, the majority of these illiterate people have a totally distorted idea of real Islam, which is tolerance, pluralism, and so on. So with 30% also under the poverty line, so you can imagine that the playing ground is quite numerous. However, since the 25th of January, the ordinary people's awareness has risen to such an extent that it is unbelievable. There is not a taxi chauffeur or even a worker who doesn't talk about politics today. And in the last month, I think the Islamic tendency has lost a lot of its popularity, first by the poor performance in Parliament, and second by this urge to monopolize all the institutions of the society, and particularly in the Constituent Assembly, which has provoked this furore that you are seeing today. I forgot your last question was what? That they were illiterate? Yeah, they are.
It actually was my initial question. Do you think that the Muslim Brotherhood is in any way playing against the rules of democracy?
If you think that monopolizing all the institutions of the society is democratic, then they are democratic. So I leave it to you.
We'll go here and then over here.
Thank you, Mushira Khattab Woodrow Wilson. Thank you very much, Dr. Mona, for this very succinct and articulate presentation of the situation right now in Egypt. Rights of women. I don't hear many supporters to maintain the rights of women. I'm glad to hear about the demand for Al-Azhar to issue a document on the rights of women. But as we speak, there are female members of the Freedom and Justice Party, the Muslim Brotherhood, who is calling for the abrogation of the laws on minimum age of marriage and the criminalization of female genital mutilation, and they want to bring down the age of marriage to 14. I didn't hear any voice on this. And if I may add an answer to your question, what the U.S. can do, the terms of U.S. aid needs to be revisited. And the system of the contractors who end up with more than 70% of the aid is really not serving the image of the United States. Thank you very much.
Concerning women's rights, there is a violent attack on all the gains that women have made since 1919, in fact. So, all the rights that you have worked so hard on, Mushira Khattab was one of our prominent ministers in Egypt for children and motherhood, and she really did a lot for the rights of women. So today, all this is at stake, and all this is being challenged, with no one, as you can see, supporting on the side of the authorities. Maybe the army is not familiar with women, we don't know. But the government is certainly very reluctant to have women in leading posts. So are the secular parties, in fact. We had elections with proportional representation, thinking that this will be a mechanism to facilitate the entrance of women, but the clause was to put a woman. So they put it at the end of the list, so obviously women didn't make it. And others, very gallantly, instead of putting the photograph of the woman who's running, they put a flower, because a woman is a shame. So, al-mar'a awra. So this is to tell you what the situation of women. However, and something that will please you, women are not keeping quiet. They're trying to revive the feminist union that was established in 1923 by Hoda Sha'arawi, who was a pioneer of the women's movement. And we have established it. In fact, it will be a union of organizations more than a union of individuals. And I think that this is much stronger, and it's going to have a voice that will be heard. Second, don't forget that women's voice counts. Many of the candidates don't seem to realize that, except secular candidates who go to women's gatherings and try to get their support. No candidate that I know on the Islamist side has mentioned any role for women in their program, except the secular candidate who is Amr Musa. The second thing also that's a very good indication that women are not keeping quiet is that when they felt that their dignity was violated a few months ago after what happened in Tahrir Square against women, 3,000 women came out and demonstrated. This has not happened since 1919. So I am not very pessimistic about women's rights. Women will stand up. They were at the forefront of the revolution. They were at the forefront of the elections. They are keeping a low profile for the time being, not to be too much attacked, but they are there.
Thank you, Doctor. I'd appreciate your comments on the... My name is Art Hughes from the Middle East Institute. Thank you. Appreciate your comments on the economic situation and how the continuing deterioration of the economic situation will impact on political developments in the short and medium term, at least. Thank you.
Of course it will impact. That's why we say that we need support to get through to the transition to democracy. Economic reform, economic support is very much in demand, and particularly from the international community, which I don't think has come out quite openly or quite generously in that domain. There are a few unpopular things, things that have to be taken, which is to remove the subsidies. But you cannot remove the subsidies unless you give something instead. And giving something instead is to find jobs, because that's the main thing that is needed today. There are 700,000 who come out every year in the labor force asking for jobs. There's also, of course, all the people who have been set aside because of the revolutionary outcome. So unemployment is one of the first priority that the next president will have to tackle. One of the other things that work in Mr. Musa's favor is that he is an international figure and knows all the international donors and has dealt with them. So I believe that his presence will be comfortable for many of the investors to come, and the investors who in Egypt are very reluctant to move today on the economic front.
Marcel Wahba, member of the board at MEI. Mona, I'd like to welcome you to Washington and thank you for a great presentation today. I found the points you made about Al-Azhar to be the most interesting. I'd like a couple of comments from you on that. One, what is the nature of the relationship between Al-Azhar and the SCAF? I know that they're a counterweight and not necessarily enamored by the Ikhwan or the Salafis, but how do they communicate or not communicate with the SCAF? The other question on my mind, if the Sheikh al-Azhar is elected, he would be elected from within the institution. And I understand that obviously the Ikhwan and the Salafists have a very strong presence within the institution. So why the optimism that that would be necessarily better? Thank you.
In our meetings, and it's a meeting where you have ulama from the Azhar, a lot of them support the Sheikh al-Azhar. Today there is, of course, a cabal against him from the Islamic tendency and particularly from the Islamic tendency within the Azhar, as you rightly suggested. I think that he has already chosen his successor, who is the present minister of the Waqf, a young man, very much in the same, he's called al-Qusi, very much in the same tendency as the Sheikh al-Azhar. And I think that the media in general is supporting him. So media today is playing a big role, and media today can buttress support for him. We, in any case, as a group in the Beit al-Aila, which is made up of liberals, leftists, Christians, Muslims, even the Brotherhood is present, have endorsed his declarations, and so it's a challenge for the Brotherhood to accept their commitment for the endorsement, which they haven't until now. But I see that as a reference to an Islamic authority, which is not only an authority in Egypt, but all over the Islamic world, I think it will have a lot of weight. And that's why I'm asking the United States today and those who are working on research or who want to see a democratic transition in Egypt to really follow what Al-Azhar is doing.
Take a question in the back.
Thank you. It's Mohammed Wafa from the Middle East Broadcast Network. During your presentation and now, you had spoken appreciatively on Amr Moussa. Do you endorse him at the next
Yes,
president?
I'm
Okay.
one of his senior advisors.
Okay, thank you.
I only decided this last week.
Okay,
Before this, I was very sympathetic, I must admit, to Dr. Abul Futuh.
Okay, thank you.
But
This is
statements of Dr. Abul Futuh lately has caused a lot of concern. And the endorsement has caused even more concern by the Jama'ah al-Islamiyya and by the Salafis and by the Hizb al-Wasat and so on. So he must pay tribute to them once he's in power. And to pay tribute to them is to radicalize his positions today as a moderate Islam.
okay. Thank you. That was the first question. I have a very direct another question as well. To the end of your presentation, you had spoken of the SCAF and how much, to some extent, they supported the revolution or they had taken some steps in the past year that might mitigated the tension in the society. Now, there is one thing that had been absent from the political discussion concerning the SCAF and the government and their relationship with the international monetary organizations like the IMF and the World Bank. Recently, there had been the negotiations between the government and probably should have been also with the SCAF on a loan that Egypt had asked it to take. This loan by itself will not do a considerable help to the community. It's only $3+ billion, but it will be used as a springboard for some other monetary relationships with donors, whether they are the IMF, World Bank, or other countries. The loan until now, yes, yeah. The loan until now had been rejected or stopped or cancelled or delayed. The IMF people say they don't have the support from the Egyptian society. But don't you think that this is a vote of no on the SCAF because they don't have the power to administer such a loan? And also, do you think this is right? Do you think the SCAF is understanding this?
Do you think that I remember your first question?
Okay.
Okay, tell me in 2 words, what is your last question?
Okay, my last question is that do you think that the delaying of the loan to Egypt is a vote of no on the SCAF? One thing, do you think the SCAF understands this? Thank you.
Okay, you first asked about the SCAF and the youth protesters. Today, unfortunately, they are in complete confrontation. What we are trying to do in the Advisory Council is to try to bring to the SCAF the demands of the protesters and to try to see how there could be some kind of compromise. And I think we will get there at some point. People feel that the country is in danger today. We are confronting the most dangerous period of our life. And unless people realize that and know what consensus and compromise mean, then we don't know. We're going towards the unknown. This is one. The second one, taking a loan from the SCAF, from the IMF, is, even if it's slow, as you say, but this means that the international institutions have confidence in Egypt. This will encourage investors. This will encourage the Arab world, who has been very slow about their pledges and who don't respect their pledges, in fact, to come out with the aid that they have promised. But I want to tell you, it's not the SCAF that is delaying, it is the Brotherhood. They have told them, don't give anything now until we come to power. So they're waiting for, and in any case, it has to take time, but this is what they told them. Wait until June when we come to the government so that we are the beneficiaries of the loan.
One last question, right here.
No, I need to hear Joe Hall, no matter what.
Okay, very quick.
Mine's going to make you mad, so maybe you should go.
No. It's another back.
Phil Frayne, Middle East Institute. Just a technical question. Assuming the president is elected before the writing of a constitution, under what powers does the president serve? Does that revert to the previous constitution? How are his powers going to be defined until the new constitution is written?
Yeah, that's the big problem that we're facing today, is that we wanted the president not to be a new pharaoh, but to have limited powers. I don't know. I think that if we go back to the 1971 constitution with some amendments, we might end up by having a constitution before the presidential election. If we don't, then we are facing a problem. So we don't even know if we're going to vote for a parliamentary system maybe in the constitution. So this would be a totally different ballgame. This would mean that no president will have the top executive power.
Unlikely a constitution can be written in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I know. Unless you bring back old constitutions. Because if not, this will mean prolonging the transitional period. I don't think that anyone wants to have that today. Not even the SCAF, funnily enough. Yeah.
Last question.
Joe.
I don't want to open
Wait for
Sorry.
the...
Oh, sorry, the mic.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually sort of not ask the original question, which spoke directly to the NGOs and how they operated. What I would want to ask you is, do you think the violent crackdown, and it was violent, on the NGOs and the persistent prosecution of NGO workers, many of whom have left the country, what really is the motivation behind this? Do you have any insight into that? And why is it continuing with such vigor on the part of the Egyptian government? What's really gained by that?
I was against this whole crackdown, as you can imagine. But they have used the fact that they don't have a license and that they were not, pushing for a license, which is a lie, because I know myself that they were pushing for a license that was never given to them. On the contrary, they were told, go ahead and work. What happened is, I think many sectors of the society, the government, some people in the government had an axe to grind because the money was not given anymore. No, the US had asked that the money goes straight to the NGOs, and this is against the law. But you could have come to a compromise, to an understanding, without having this crackdown, which was absolutely ridiculous and which, caused an uproar with the human rights activists and with a lot of us in the liberal society. Now, a law, we have asked that there should be a law today that regulates the presence of NGOs, whether Egyptian or foreign. So we're waiting for the parliament to bring up this law. I don't know why they're not doing it, because they were part of the attack also. They were attacking also the NGOs. Americans are an easy prey, so it's good.
To be fair, not all of them were American.
I know. One of them was German, who's been there for years.
A revolution led by civil society. My question is, why wasn't there outrage from civil society? And then the follow-up is simply, there's Interpol has put out warrants for people that have left the country. There's vigorous, persistent pursuit on the part of the Egyptian government of people that were NGO workers, right or wrong, whether they were there, right or wrong, whether their institutions had them there, right or wrong. It seems to me that the pursuit of them far outweighs anything that might have happened due to their presence there, and it's senseless to me, and I'm just concerned.
That's what I said, and that's what I said, that bilateral relations should not be at stake because of American NGOs. I mean, that was absolutely ridiculous. But thank God, the Americans overcame this and did not cut the aid or do the wrong thing at the right time or at the wrong time. But there is today a great awareness of what civil society and the need for civil society now. Because it's not only Americans who are attacked. The Egyptian NGOs also are attacked, but they're not keeping quiet. They're suing the government. They're suing mostly the ministers who were responsible for that.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Just extremely good.
Thank you.
No, we'll look forward to you coming back this time next year.
Yeah.